Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third workshop for SciTi this quarter. Happy to have everyone here. If you have any questions for Chanel, of course, during her personal statements workshop, please feel free to ask or drop it in the chat. And otherwise, I'll just go ahead and let Chanel start.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi everyone. My name is Chanel. I am a doctoral student here at UCR. I'll talk a little bit more about my background. But for people who just joined or didn't get a chance to, I'd love to just hear what types of programs people are potentially interested in, or if they're not sure, that's totally fine. Just so I kind of know what my audience is, right? Like master's or PhD, and what type of a program like education or psychology. And again, if you don't know, that's totally fine. I had no idea when I left undergrad, so no pressure. Like I said, I just like to know because there's different information for both. Okay, but yeah, here's my email, and we'll get started. I think I put the link already, but I'll just put it here again for anyone who needs it. The slides are on Google Drive, so feel free to share them with, whoever you feel needs them. I don't mind. Okay. So yeah, like I said, my name is Chanel. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a second year school psychology student in the doctoral program here at UCR. And yeah, my email's there in case you have extra questions or anything like that after. But yeah, that was me when I was an undergrad. So when I was in your guys's shoes, many moons ago, feels like. And yeah, I'm the clinic coordinator for the Search Center, which is here at UCR. We're a free autism assessment clinic. I'm also the administrative assistant for Autism Goes to College, which is an initiative to help support autistic college students navigate through like the college experience, get supports and things like that. And then I am also a part of a private practice that we mainly focus on serving students and providing them independent educational evaluations. So IEEs, if you're familiar with the school process, we work closely with a lot of lawyers and lawyers and community organizers who support low income, high need communities and making sure that they have equitable access to IEPs and education for students with disabilities. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. And if you are in my TA class, which some of you are, you already know I'm a fan of self-affirmations, right? Words matter. What we tell ourselves really is important and really matters. And I think that's especially important when you're going through the grad school process because it can be rough, right? Like rejection sucks. It's inevitable, but it's not fun. So I think that it's important to remind ourselves, right, that like you're not defined by an acceptance or a rejection, right? I know it can be really difficult to like not compare ourselves to other people and like, oh, this person has all this stuff and this person has all these awards and there's just me and I don't know what I have, right? Everyone has something to, everyone has their own path and their own story. So everyone has something unique to contribute. And also like your worth is not measured by your productivity or your accolades. And I think that's really important to remember when you're applying to grad school, because sometimes we tell ourselves really mean things, right? So yeah, just be kind to yourself. This process is not fun and it's not easy. So it is an accomplishment within itself. Okay, so I am going to skip over these since we're mostly talking about like grad school apps and personal statements, but you guys have the slides in case you want to look that stuff over. It's mostly just about like if you're not sure what you want to do, take advantage of networking now, and yeah, just some other random information. Okay, so grad school apps. one thing I really want to emphasize is like when like grad school, your grad school application should really tell a story about you, right? Like the whole application, start to finish, should be a story about you, right? And your career and like your, like why you're here and what your path is. So I really want that to be at the forefront when you're doing your grad school apps, because you should be looking at your whole application, right? Start to finish, and being like, what does this say about me, right? What am I trying to tell admissions people, and what does my current application say about me, right? And what does it not say about me? So those are all the things you want to constantly be asking yourself when you're going through the application process. Yeah, just some ways that I feel like you can make yourself a competitive applicant. Happy to go into that more later as well. But I know, this is mostly for personal statements, so gonna try and focus on that mostly, but happy to talk about it too at the end. I did want to add something about letters of rec, again, because I know this is like about personal statements. However, letters of rec are super important and often overlooked in terms of like preparing for them and getting them and all that stuff. I feel like often it's the part that is overlooked, and then people are like, shoot, now I need these 3 letters of rec and I don't know who to ask, or now my professor said no and I don't know who else to ask. So starting early is really important, especially if you're taking gap years, especially if you're taking gap years, make sure you start early. Be intentional about who you ask for your letter of rec, right? How will this person support your application? And if possible, right, get people who can speak to a variety of your skills, right? It's better to have 3 people who can speak about your skills like in different areas, right? Or different types of skills versus like 3 people who all say the exact same set of skills, right? Jenna is hardworking and organized, right? If you have 3 letters of rec that say Jenna is hardworking and organized, right? It's kind of boring. It's not bad necessarily, but the more variety, like the more skills you can get to that, and like experiences that you can get someone to talk about you, is like the better, right? If someone says, if Jenna has 3 letters of rec and they all say Jenna is organized and detailed, right? Versus if Jenna had 3 letters of rec and one said, she's great with working with kids, she's organized and detail oriented, right? And another one says, Jenna is great with working with, I don't know, teens or adults, right? And she has strong clinical skills, and she is reliable, right? Though that is a more robust picture of Jenna than just 3 letters that are similar and say a few things. Okay. If you're asking a professor, one thing you just have to keep in mind, right? The professor has to remember you out of 100+ students. So, some ways you can make yourself stand out, right? Go to office hours, participate in class. I know a lot of you don't like it, but turn your camera on. If you want a letter of rec from that professor, I'm serious. Like when you, as a TA, when you stare at a screen of black screens all day, sometimes it's like, I don't know who I'm talking to anymore. You want your face and your name to be memorable, right? So those are just some ways to do that. Not saying you have to do it for all your professors, but right, if you want a letter of rec from one, you need to make a good impression. The other thing is, it's easier to ask for a letter of rec now versus asking 3 months plus later, right? So if you're in a class right now and you're like, hey, right, it's week 7, you're like, hey, I like this professor. Their class is really interesting. I'm doing pretty well. I'm pretty sure I want to ask them for a letter of rec. If you know that right now, talk to them. Bring it up. Hey, I'm going to be applying to grad school. I really enjoy your class. I'm learning a lot. Would you be open to writing me a letter of rec down the line, right? Starting that conversation. The worst thing they can say is no. But it's better to do it now, right? When you're in the class, or maybe you took it last quarter, or, maybe you're going to take one in spring or whatever it may be. It's better to do it now versus like 3, 4, 6 months later after you've taken the class and you're like, hey, I was in your class in spring 2021. Will you write me a letter of rec? And that professor's probably like, I don't remember who you are, right? Like, who are you, right? You took that class a year ago, right? How am I supposed to know who you are? So always easier to plant the seed now. Again, the worst thing they can say is say no. Yeah. And it's generally speaking, like there's obviously specific exceptions, but generally speaking, if you're going to ask a professor, it should probably be a professor from your upper division courses, not your lower division. If at all possible, I would say it's better to get a professor from an upper division course if you're trying to apply for grad school. Okay. And keep communication open with your recommender, right? Talking to them, right? Hey, my application, right? Someone's agreed to write your letter of rec, right? And now it's like, okay, there's this whole process, right? I think it's super important to have open communication. Hey, my applications are due here. Would it be helpful if I send you reminders? Or, are you like, can I just, will you just make sure to send it, right? Asking them if they would like reminders, because honestly, like as a grad student and like working with professors, there's a million other things on their plate. Like a letter of rec is like the last thing on their mind. Not that they don't want to write it for people, right? As a professor, that's what students are going to ask for, because we've all been there, right? They know it. That's what students ask for. A lot of professors I know are happy to do it. It's just like on the task list of things that need to be done and get done, right? Like oftentimes letters of rec are unfortunately at the bottom, just because it's like, you need it from them. So I think if you need permission from someone to like, it's okay to remind them, right? It's okay to be like, hey, I need this letter of rec. Like you agreed, right? It's due in 3 weeks, right? Like, I haven't heard. It's okay for you to insert yourself, right? You need this for an application, right? So just remember that you need to do it for yourself. I know it can be scary, because I was always like, oh my God, I'm going to email them for like the 3rd time asking for this letter of rec, even though they already agreed. And even one time I said, hey, I know I've sent you a lot of reminders. I don't mean to, bother you or pester you, but, I just, want to make sure it gets turned in. Is it helpful for me to send these reminders, or would you prefer if I don't, right? And she responded, no, I love the reminders. It's the last thing on my mind. I want to write it for you, but it's just there's lots of stuff going on, right? So please keep sending the reminders, right? So again, keeping that open communication with your recommenders I think is really important. And making sure you ask for what you need, right? Again, the worst they can say is no. When I had all of my letter of recommenders, I met with all 3 of them individually, right, to talk about what they were going to write in my letters of rec. So, from 2 of my letters of rec, I was pretty sure I already knew what they were going to say about me. It was the 3rd one that I was like, oh, it was from my professor, right? I was like, oh, okay, she doesn't know me as well. And it's my only letter from a professor. So, when I met with her, I said, my other letters are saying X, Y, and Z skills about me. I would greatly appreciate if you could speak on my skills as a student, right? My skills and potential as a graduate student, right? I forget. Yeah, like my writing skills, right? I was like, this is what my other 2 recommenders are saying. This is what I really need for a strong application. Like if you're willing to add anything about this, right? Again, the worst thing they can say is, no, I don't feel comfortable adding that, or I don't know you well enough to add that, right? Those are all fair things. But if that's what you feel would make your application more well-rounded, to have certain things that is missing from another letter of rec, or I don't know, something, don't be afraid to ask. Again, the worst thing they can say is no. Okay. Ask at least 2 to 3 months prior to the due date for them to start writing for them to start writing, right? So like I said, the earlier you ask and just get a solidified yeah, right, the better. But like you should at least let them know at least 2 to 3 months before the application is due to be like, hey, application's due this date, right? I need you to write it now, actually. Like, now is the time to be writing it. That I think is different. And yeah, again, don't be afraid to follow up, send reminders, whatever, right? You need this to get to your next steps. And then if you're taking gap years, right, if you secure that one before you graduate, I think that's the best. And then you just check in. I took a couple of gap years and one of my professors, she knew I was going to she knew I was going to go to grad school, right? We had conversations about this and I just kept checking in. After 1 year, right, I was like, hey, still going to apply to grad school, not sure yet what, it's going to take another gap year, really appreciate you agreeing to write my letter of rec. I'll follow up, in 6 months to a year when I, figure out my next steps. And I did. And then I was like, hey, I decided on a program, going to be taking the GRE and, doing all that stuff. I'll be reaching out to you in like August of, this year to, write my letter of rec. Any questions about that so far? I know it's not exactly personal statements, but like I said, letters of rec are super important and often forgotten or neglected because I was like, oh yeah, letters of rec. And you need so many. A lot of schools, you need 3, which is a lot. Okay. So personal statements. Only one of mine was a professor. So you can write if it says 3, I think a lot of, especially for PhDs, at least a lot of them are 3 and one of them needs to be a professor. So you could have 3 from professors, you could have 2 from professors, right? But I think it's like a minimum of at least 1. I can go into it I'm going to go into a little bit more later, but and my students know this, I'm very transparent, but I did horribly when I was in undergrad. I failed a lot of classes. So, and I did not do any of these things I'm telling you guys to do, right? I didn't ask any of my professors. I asked one like a year later and she was like, I don't even know who you are, right? I went through all of these trials and tribulations because I was a terrible student. So, I had 2 supervisors from my gap years write my letters of rec, and then I had one professor who I had as a upper division undergraduate. Hopefully that answers, but yeah, you don't have to just have one professor. It's really kind of up to you. So that's a great question. So there was a question about getting letters of rec from grad students or TAs. I would say if it's your last resort, then yes. But if you have time and you're able to get it from either that professor in that class or find another, I think professors are always going to be the most competitive. I know that people will ask the professor and the professor will have the TA like write it and speak on it, but it's really dependent on the professor. I want to emphasize that it just really depends on the professor. But yeah, I would say if you're doing a PhD program, I would stray away from grad students and TAs unless like that grad student or TA was like your supervisor in like a research lab or something like that. But again, if you're in a research lab, just ask whoever the director is. And again, they usually just like make their grad students write it and then they sign off on it, which it happens a lot, but at least you still get the professor's signature. So again, keeping that communication open and seeing what you can get, because yeah, I would try and stay away from like a grad student signing it. Okay. All great questions. How many people should we have in mind of getting a letter of rec on? Yeah, that's a great question also. So how many people should we have in mind of getting a letter of recommendation from? That really depends on what program you're applying to and what their requirements are. So masters, a lot of master's programs, I believe, are only 2 letters of rec. Don't quote me, but there are some master's programs where 3 letters of rec, right? Or 2 required, 3 recommended, right? If it says 3 recommended, you should do 3. But like all PhD programs are pretty much 3. Pretty sure like 3 is the minimum. But again, you just kind of have to start looking into those things when you start applying. If you know what programs you want to apply to, it usually doesn't change from year to year, but it's generally 2 to 3. Okay, all great questions. Okay, just want to make sure that I address this. Who else could write your letter of rec besides a professor, right? A supervisor, if like in a relevant field, right? So like a director if you work at a research lab, if you work at a clinic, right? Like whoever your direct supervisor is. If you work in education, whoever the highest ranked person you could get to write you a letter of rec, but typically like your direct supervisors are good. Who else? Yeah, like if you're in any like extracurriculars, right? Research labs, clinics, yeah, volunteer stuff, pretty much like anyone who is like who is either your direct supervisor, or if you can get someone who's like the director or something to write you a letter of rec, working all of those avenues. But yeah, I had 2 of my directors from the clinics that I worked at write my letters of rec, and then 1 professor. So hopefully that gives you guys some ideas of options. But yeah, any like internships or, you know, labs or research that you're in are great places to ask for letters of rec. Okay, personal statements. So love and hate personal statements personally. But some really important things that you should be asking yourself when you're writing and drafting and thinking about your personal statements, right? What's your purpose, right? Like, why are you seeking graduate school? What's your drive and your passion, right? Like, why are you trying to pursue this field? Why are you dedicating more of your life to school and maybe money, but definitely your time, right? Like, why is this the route you've chosen? Just to give you guys a little bit of background about like how I conceptualized my personal statements. Again, personal statements are not cookie cutter, right? No one because it's like your personal experience, right? And no one personal experience is the same as someone else's. But just to give you guys like a little like I don't know, like how I figured out what I wanted to write. So I went to UCLA, and when I was in high school, right, I was a big fish in a little pond, right? And then I went to UCLA and I was a little fish in a ginormous pond. And I started to struggle very, very quickly. I failed a lot of classes. I dropped a lot of classes. I took a couple of incompletes on my transcript. Like, right, I had it all. My transcript was like a beautiful rainbow of all kinds of stuff. And when I was trying to figure out like, what do I want to do, right? Where am I going? Because I was a bio major, and then I was psychobio, and then I was just psychology, right? I was like all over the place. But the one thing I always came back to was I love working with kids. I love working with kids. So I knew whatever I did, it was going to be around working with kids. And when I was an undergrad, I struggled a lot with my mental health. I like I had like an anxiety disorder, I had a panic disorder, I had like depression and insomnia, and all that stuff. So mental health, right? Like psychology was very much in that realm of like where I wanted to go, right? I knew I wanted to work with kids. And then I had all of this like mental health, like psychology, personal experience that I wanted to explore more, right? So I started interning and volunteering in like, in psychology stuff, right? In anxiety clinics and autism clinics and like all this different stuff, right? So, and then when I left grad school, right, same thing, I was burnt out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take my time and, figure out and work in the field that I like and figure out what I want to do. And that's when I started working at the hospital at UCLA. And at UCLA, very affluent population, right? Where we worked with very, very, very affluent families who flew all over the world to do our program. So, would pay out of pocket without insurance, right? For a program that costs like $20,000 a day. So that's the type of money that we're talking about, right? And when I grew up in a very low income to middle class area, right? So I knew a lot of people in high school who, who dropped out, right? Were, susceptible to drugs, who went to jail or juvie, all those things. So for me, it did not sit right with me working in a hospital, like working with kids with, who have all this money and all this access to resources and things like that, right? I wanted to be where kids who needed it most were, which is how I got to education, right? So that is kind of how I conceptualized my personal statements, right? Because of the personal experiences that I experienced, right? Because of like my own personal experiences, but also my work experiences, right? Like I knew that I needed to come back to where I could impact like students the most, right? Which is in education. And it's important to me to do that in the mental health and like psychology framework, which is how I got to school psychology, right? So just thinking about how your story, your path kind of led you down to where you want to be and how it leads you forward. So yes, so let me see here. I wanted to do a quick activity. I know we're recording, but can we still do breakout rooms?
We can. I think we'd probably have to stop the recording.
Okay.
But there's like 12 of us here. I don't know like how small of a breakout room you want, but I think this room is pretty small actually.
Yeah, fair. Let me see, what time is it? It's 6. Okay. We'll have this as a thought exercise. How about that?
I can just pause the recording if you want and then like continue after. Like that works too.
Let's see. We'll leave this for a thought exercise, and then if I get through everything, then we can see if there's time left, and because I want to make sure I answer people's questions too. My students already know, but I ramble a lot, so I often go over, so I want to make sure that we get to everything. Of course. Okay, but yeah, start thinking about like, right, if you were to explain to someone why you're pursuing graduate school, right, why you're pursuing the career that you want, and trying to do that as concisely as possible, right? Like what I just told you was not very concise, and right, but being able to take all of that and go into like a very concise paper is challenging, and sometimes like talking about it out loud first to someone can help you organize what you're trying to say and then put it on paper, right? Like sometimes we're very more clear in our speaking than in our writing. So if you're feeling stuck about like, I don't know, something's just not coming across or it's just not clear, something that I did when I wrote my personal statements too was like record myself and literally just said, like, read the prompt for the personal statement, and then like just word vomited why I'm going to grad school and like all the stuff, and then, you know, listened back to it and then like jotted all of my notes down. And yes, an elevator pitch is 30 seconds to a minute, but you know, personal statements are hard. So yeah. So yeah, definitely if you're feeling stuck, I really encourage you to like, yeah, record yourself, and like just talk to yourself, right? Like explain how you would explain to a person why you're doing grad school and record it. And then you can play it back and, you know, figure out where all the pieces fit. Okay. Yeah, like I said, writing about yourself, right? And potentially like your accomplishments and or like your challenges is hard, right? Everyone is always like, oh, I don't want to like boast about myself, or like, oh, I don't want to act like, you know, I've had it so much harder than everyone else, or, you know, I don't want pity, you know, all these different thoughts running through your mind because you're writing about something that is very personal to you. It's hard, right? And it's especially hard because you're like so close, right? These are your personal experiences. These are your accomplishments. You see it right here, right? So it's hard for you to get that perspective sometimes. But these are some important things to ask yourself, right? What am I trying to convey to the reader or the application committee? Do I want them to know about all of the hurdles I've had to overcome and how I've overcome them and how they like drive my passion? Are you trying to convey to the reader that you have all these like amazing intuitive research ideas, and this is how you're going to expand the field because you have these amazing ideas about research, right? Are you trying to communicate that you're a first generation student and, you know, what that means for you and why it like fuels you to go to graduate school? All of these things, right? You really just need to ask yourself, like, what's your why, and how, and what are you trying, how you're trying to convey that to an application committee, right? And like, yeah, why you're trying to convey that to the application committee. Okay. Yeah, some other things to ask yourself, right? How will I advance or contribute to this field, right? Especially if you're in psychology or education or like anything in that realm, like helping field, they want to see how you're going to be a change maker, right? That's the, like, you know, that's the a big kicker. They always want to see who's the next change maker, right? Why are you going to change the field? Why are you going to make the field better? If you're going into a helping profession like psychology or education or anything like that, it's definitely very important. And especially if you're doing a PhD and you're doing research, they want to know, right? How are you contributing to the field? How are you contributing to the literature? Because that's what you do in a PhD. Okay. And yeah, asking yourself, why am I a strong candidate for this program? And I think being really, truly honest with yourself, right? Like writing down why you think you are a strong applicant, right? You don't have to share it with anyone, right? No one is going to judge you for being egotistical or anything like that. But I think really think critically, like what makes me a strong candidate for this program and why should they accept me? And yeah, how have my past experiences led me to the path goals I have now, right? Like what things either in your early life or in your work experience or in your school experience or whatever it may be, how has that contributed to the path and the goals you have now, right? Everyone comes to a career and a discipline and like a path somehow, some way, right? You don't just randomly wake up or I definitely didn't randomly wake up one day and I was like, I'm going to be a school psychologist. Like, no, I didn't even know what a school psychologist was when I left undergrad. So it's like clearly somehow, some way I went down this path of like getting rid of all these other options and narrowing in on school psychology. So just thinking about what that process is like for you. Okay. Anyone have questions about that stuff so far?
How long are personal statements typically? Like 1 page, 2 page, 3 pages, double space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Similar to how many letters of rec you need. Also going to depend on the type of program, right? Master's or PhD. And yeah, type of like it's all going to vary. There's usually like a word count and things like that. But I would generally say for like a PhD, it's definitely like, I think 2 pages double space. Don't quote me. For masters, from what I remember, it's typically like a bunch of shorter essay prompts. So like, or at least when I applied to my master's programs, I had like 3 or 4 like 500-word prompts. So but again, it really varies by program, school, like all of it, like degree, right? Because PhD, they're going to make you do more. Should our personal statement vary for each school that we apply to? Great question. So each school is probably going to have a different prompt. So, but it's all generally going to be around the same idea. So the most time efficient way is to read all your prompts, right? Obviously. And then you can kind of write one main personal statement. And then what I did was I took pieces of it and fit it in other areas for different programs, right? If like, so like if one program was like, oh, you know, what, I don't even remember anymore. What I can show you guys some of the prompts that I had, but you know, what experiences in education like have led you to you know, picking the field of psychology or something like that, right? So I would write like one personal statement, and then based off of the prompts of other personal statements, I would kind of like, you know, pick and like choose parts and like meld them together, because that's going to be the most time efficient, because you can't write 7+ personal statements. It's just not feasible. I mean, you can, but I would highly discourage it because everyone needs a life. Yes. So yeah, if you know, how I did it was my top program, like this #1 school I wanted to go to. I wrote that personal statement first, and then from that personal statement, I picked and chose stuff and like made it fit with other schools and their specific prompt. So like a lot more editing than like having to reinvent the wheel and like write, you know, 5 different personal statements. But honestly, sometimes schools ask really weird prompts and you just really can't make the puzzle fit, right? Don't force the puzzle if they're asking you about, you know, education and your personal statement is about, I don't know, like biotech, right? You can't force a puzzle where it's supposed to be. So definitely read the prompt and like and think about the prompt, and then try and see if you can fit pieces where they go, but don't force the piece. Are there keywords or phrases we should write to make our personal statement application stand out? Great question. Okay, so definitely avoid cliches. I know a lot of people, like everyone wants a good hook at the beginning of your personal statement, right? You should have a good hook, right? Something that grabs the reader's attention, but it shouldn't be like a cliche, right? Like, I don't know. One day I was like out on a walk and then it just suddenly came upon me to do this field, right? Like try and avoid too many cliches or even quotes. I would really stay away from quotes, right? Lots of people like to quote like their favorite psych researcher, right? I would really avoid doing that because again, that kind of falls under like those like cliches. And yeah. And then I will get to the rest of like keywords or phrases in a little bit. So hang tight. Okay. So personal statements, again, if you are going to write about challenges that you've experienced, that's fine, right? It's your story, right? If that's what's important to how you got to where you are and where you're going, and you feel it's important to add it, add it. But frame it as strength-based, right? And avoid sounding bitter or resentful, right? It can be really easy. So in my situation, right, it could have been really easy for me to be like, you know, I went through all this stuff. I had a terrible time in undergrad. I almost dropped out, blah, 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 all this stuff. And, complain, right? Like, woe is me. I went through all this hard stuff. Which, yes, that is like something I experienced, but, what they want to see is like, how did you overcome that? And how did that make you the person you are? Right. So for me, right, the way I framed it as strength-based was all of the challenges and the hurdles and the barriers that I had to overcome with my own mental health gave me deep empathy and compassion for other people, right? So that when I work with any student, any family, anyone, right, who's struggling with mental health or like a disability or anything like that, I can have deep compassion and understanding for them. Does that make sense? How you can like flip a challenge or, a hardship and turn it into a strength. Sometimes it takes a little thought, right? Especially, like I said, if you're right here and you're like, all this really sucky stuff has happened to me. How is that a strength? Sometimes you just really have to sit with yourself and like, ask yourself, family member getting sick, how did that drive me to where I want to be, right? Like, if you have a family member who, I don't know, has social challenges or, maybe has a disability, how did that lead you to the field you're in now? So those are my 2 cents about if you're going to write about challenges. Some things I really highly recommend that you add to your personal statements are a brief statement about how the program you are applying to is going to help you achieve your next goals, right? You can do this in 1 to 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be anything super long, but just like, so for me, right, UCR's school psych program is very behaviorally based. So there's a lot of like behavior interventions and stuff like that, right? So the UCR school psychology program is, going to facilitate my next steps in my career goals because I want to do research in evidence-based, behavioral practices. I'll get hands-on experience and knowledge with a behavioral emphasis, right? So like, how is that program, what's unique about that program that's going to help you facilitate your next career goals, right? Showing them that you're thinking forward beyond grad school, right? Or like already into grad school, right? You're thinking forward. You have a plan. You're like long-term sighted. Okay. Should this statement be tailored to the school or just programs in general, specific to UCR versus specific to PhD? That's a great question. So PhD is definitely a very unique one because you have to consider the aspect of research as well. So a lot of personal statements for PhD programs, they'll ask at some point, like, what's your research interest? Why are you like coming here and researching and stuff like that, right? And so if you're writing personal statements for a PhD in general, right, you should have something about what your research interests are, right? Like, when I'm a PhD student, I want to pursue this line of research, these topics, stuff like that. it should be specific to the school in that you've already researched who the professors are and who you might want to work under and what their research is and how you see yourself participating in that research. So in my field, right, my advisors are heavily like autism based, and we're also we support high need communities, right? So those are two areas that I feel very strongly and passionately about. So when I wrote my personal statement for UCR, I talked a lot about specifically how I wanted to do research with high need communities in the autism field, right? And like all of those kinds of things, right? Whereas when I applied to UC Berkeley, their program and their advisors were much more meta, right? So like they research concepts that are much more meta, right? Like hopelessness, grit, you know, like that kind of stuff, right? Like not as observable, more meta, like, you know, theory. Sorry, that's what I meant. More theory based. So my personal statements for Berkeley were, you know, especially this part, right? This statement about how the program is going to help you achieve, were more geared towards theory-based research, right? And work that they were doing at UC Berkeley. Does that make sense? So in short, yes, your statements should be tailored to the school and the program, especially if you're doing PhD. PhD can be, yeah, it's very complicated. I will definitely talk about that a little bit more. Okay. I also recommend adding a brief statement about why you would be an asset to the program you're applying to, right? I'm trying to think how to word this. It's like not perfect, but you know, I'm confident that, you know, based off of my prior experiences of working with children and my clinical skills, I would be, you know, an asset to the UCR school psychology program, you know, X, Y, and Z. Again, doesn't have to be long, 1 to 2 sentences, but just telling them explicitly like why you would be an asset to this program, right? As a woman of color, right? As a first generation student, I provide perspectives to, you know, the field and to, you know, this area of research that I hope, you know, will broaden a lot of, you know, perspectives and research opportunities, right? Whatever it may be. I just recommend adding a brief statement. Again, only 1 to 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be anything like extremely long, just why that program would be lucky to have you, right? Why you would make their program better. Okay. I also recommend using text to voice to read back to you, right? Because when we read it in our heads, we're like auto-correcting as we're reading it. But if you have like an app, just read it out loud to you, it won't auto-correct it, right? So you'll hear right away when you did a run-on, you'll hear right away when something sounds really clunky. All of the stuff, right? So I really encourage you to use like some sort of text to voice once you're done writing your first draft and just listening to it, because you'll be like, oh, what did I say there? Definitely happens to me. And then I recommend having 2 to 3 people who know you well read your drafts, right? And this doesn't have to be anyone like super intimidating, right? It can be someone like your roommate, right? Who knows you well, or your best friend, right? I often find that roommates and best friends can be very helpful, especially if they're not in this field, because if they're like, I don't understand what that is, right? Then, okay, maybe you need to rethink about how you're phrasing that to make it more clear. But advisors and trusted mentors are also great people to, you know, run drafts by. Yeah, especially if like I said, if there are people already in a program like that and they have mentored you and they know you well, you know, always doesn't hurt to have them read your draft. Okay. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and then I'll kind of go in more to like PhD stuff because PhD is just a whole nother ballpark. Supplemental and optional statements. All applications have this, right? It's that extra like, is there anything else that you'd like to tell the application committee or blah, blah? Is there any part of your application that's not currently explained or whatever, right? This is that optional or supplemental statement or section. Only use this optional section if there are areas of your application that need addressing, but are not otherwise covered in other sections. For example, incompletes on a transcript, large gaps in your education due to life circumstances, right? If you had to take a quarter, 2 quarters off or whatever, here's your chance to explain why. I used that to explain all of my incompletes. Yes, thank you about the time. Yeah, I had to explain, right? Why did I have so many incompletes? That was my chance to do it. But I really encourage you to make sure it's necessary to discuss this, right? And make sure it's not discussed anywhere else. You don't want to be repetitive because they're already reading a ton of applications, right? And this is optional. So if you're making them read something that was optional, probably not going to bode well. But if you need to explain something, explain it, right? Like I needed to. I couldn't, I needed to explain why I had so many gaps in my classes and why I had to retake so many. So, all right, I do want to be mindful of leaving the last few minutes for questions. Like I said, I have a bunch of other slides on other things. But yeah, if anyone has questions about personal statements specifically, I want to make sure I address those first, since that's what we're here to talk about. And there was a question about, do I know the average time it takes to receive an acceptance or rejection letter from a PhD program? Unfortunately, I do not. Typically from so I also found out I was rejected from a bunch of programs when I went to my only interview day for UCR, and everyone else was like, oh yeah, I interviewed at Berkeley and UC Santa Barbara. And I was like, oh, I didn't hear from them. So guess that means I got rejected. So that's really tough. And I've been there. A lot of us have been there. That was like a huge gut wrench at my interview day. I was like, oh, I was waiting for them to contact me and they already had interview day. Well, that sucks. That was really hard to sit with. Unfortunately, I don't know the average time. A lot of times they don't officially reject you until they have all of their class accepted, in case they need to last minute interview and accept people, which is really sucky. I know, I've been there. But yeah, I would say from my understanding of when I applied to grad school, if you haven't heard by now, for an interview, typically a lot of interviews take place on the early side of January and February. Yeah. And there was another comment about hearing stories from people that schools just won't respond. Yeah, unfortunately, that really is the name of the game. Like I said, I found out about 2 schools that I didn't get into because other people had already interviewed and got acceptance letters. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's not ideal. And I'm sorry, it does suck, but yeah. Short but concise. Yeah, so what are some tips for keeping personal statements short but concise? One of mine is only 500 words, so I'm nervous how to include everything. Definitely very important. I think really identifying first what you want to say, right? What are you trying to get across? And make write one sentence before you even start writing. This is what I want to get across to the readers, right? And if that changes, that's okay. But I think you should have like a base sentence, so that way whenever you edit and go back, you're like, okay, am I addressing this sentence, right? Am I getting this across? I encourage you to not write with a word count. I know it can be very hard and very anxiety provoking, but oftentimes, and again, just my opinion, take it or leave it, but I have found that when we write restricted, right, when we're writing to a number, you are not letting your full thoughts and ideas fully come out, right? Because you're already editing yourself. But as writers, we often write too much and can easily concise and cut words down. It's easier to cut stuff out than it is to like either add stuff or yeah, because I found, again, my own experience, take it or leave it, but I found that when we write to a word count, you're already editing yourself in your head because you're like, I need to make sure it's below this 500 words, but then you're not allowing yourself to really write out what you're trying to say. So you're kind of already limiting yourself. I find that it's easy, right? Word vomit, get it all out there, and then go back and like, okay, this is redundant. I already said this somewhere else, right? And just start cutting it out. Yes. And yeah, it's weird. It's like so psychological, but it's so true. When you're like looking at that number and you're like, oh my God, I only have 2 more words to write everything I want to say. Okay, let me write it as concisely as I want to say it. And then you're just not allowing yourself really to fully try and explain what you're trying to say. Yeah, word vomit and then cut. It's so much easier to cut stuff down and cut stuff out than it is to like get everything you want to say out and like cohesively. But like obviously don't write 10 pages because that's going to be impossible to cut out to 500 words. And other people can be really helpful with editing also. Like if you wrote word vomit and you're like, okay, I'm at like 700 words, having other people read it, right? And they can be like, you said that already, that's excess words, right? You know, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I did want to add this, since people were talking about, right, like not getting in and things like that. It's really common. I just want to normalize that. It is very, very, very common. And again, going back to those self-affirmations, right? Like it doesn't mean you're never going to get into grad school. It doesn't mean you're not fit for grad school. None of that is true just because you didn't get accepted. But you know, what do you do now, right? Because you obviously probably still want to go to grad school. So now what? Network, right? Really encourage you guys to network, talk to whoever you can, right? Make connections. Yes, Saikai is a network, absolutely. It's so much easier when you're in college. It gets so hard when you leave college. I'm not saying that to scare you. I just mean like do what you can now. I know it's hard with COVID and things, but you know, do your best to reach out to people, talk to your professors, you know, use your Saikai network. These are great networks to use. Yeah, reach out to students and faculty in the program, right? Hey, I applied this year, I didn't get in, you know, I'd love to know, you know, how I could be a more competitive applicant, you know, just talking to people, right? Especially for students, we were all there at one point. And really evaluate your application, right? What's missing or what could be stronger? Do you need more experience in a certain field? Do you need research experience? Are your letters of rec not that great? Are your personal statements like meh? You know, all things to really evaluate. But the longer you're out of undergrad, like the less your grades and other things matter, I will say. So yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, yeah, all these slides are here for you. There's other stuff about gap years. Yeah, and just other resume writing, other random stuff. Sorry, one more thing. I wanted to come back to this, and I still want to come back to this. So how to make yourself a competitive applicant, especially for PhD programs. In like the summer, if your application is due, I don't know, like in the fall or whatever, in the summer, you should be emailing faculty that you potentially want to work under at those universities, right? So in the summer, I went to the UCR website. I looked at all the faculty in the school psychology department. I read a bunch of their papers and what their research was about. And then I started emailing them. Hey, Dr. Johnson, I am going to be applying to the UCR school psychology program. I saw your research interests are in X, Y, and Z, and I'm really interested in pursuing research in X, Y, and Z. I would love to chat, blah, blah, blah. They do this all the time. I talk to all of the professors here at the UCR fact program before I even applied and interviewed, right? Getting your name out there, having these discussions with them, right? It's really important with a PhD. And it's even more important for a PhD because someone is going to be your research advisor, right? Someone who oversees you for 5+ years of your academic career. And I cannot stress enough that whoever that person is so, so, so important to your success. I cannot stress that enough. Yes, you want your research interests to align with them, of course, right? I don't want to be in, I don't know, a lab about something I'm not interested in, right? Of course, you want the research to be something you're aligned to, but at the same time, your PhD advisor, they're your mentor for 5 to 6 years. That's a huge thing, right? A PhD is a huge thing. Whoever your mentor is a huge thing. Asking them, I added it here, did I did not. Okay. Asking them questions like, what is your mentoring style, right? Are they hands-off? Are they, more hands-on? Important thing to know about, right? I am not someone who benefits from a research advisor who is hands-off because I have ADHD and nothing will ever get done. So hands-off does not work for me, right? I need regular check-ins. I need deadlines. I need consistency, right? So those are all important things to ask. Sorry, I know we went over, but you guys asked a lot of stuff about PhDs, and that part is really, really, really important. You need to reach out to potential research advisors and PhD advisors and figuring out what their mentoring style is, because it's very, very important. All right, I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Chanel, so much. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to stop the recording here.